You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Thursday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. Find out all the different places where you can hear this show in its audio format and listen to the archives. Places like Spreaker, like iTunes, like iHeartRadio, all of those places. And the links are all over there at Odyssey Radio. You can also come over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast of this show. Sometimes we have great pictures and diagrams and stuff to show. Other times you're just watching my face talk. So the video isn't all that impressive until you add in the fact that this is where there is a live chat room that's going on. It's starting right now as you're listening to this over on the YouTube channel, filled with Intrepids and other people that are interested in this show and the information we present. So go on over to youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts, and you'll find all of that goodness over there, as well as the archives of every show we've ever done. So you'll find that over there. I don't think we're missing any. And so this show, as you know, and I've said it many times, I don't like to focus on politics. We will mention some politically oriented things, like I'm going to do in a minute here. We're just going to start off and bump something here. But I don't like this show to be about politics. There's enough shows out there that do that. There's enough pundits out there that do that. There's enough partisans. There's enough, what would you call them? People who are just squarely ensconced in their liberalism or their conservatism, their right-wingism, their left-wingism, their extremism, and you can find just about anything that pleases and tickles your fancy. I try to use common sense, but I definitely have a conservative bent. So you're going to hear some of that from me. I definitely support the President of the United States, who is the President right now, and I will vote for him again. And that doesn't mean he is my best, most favoritist president in all the world, and all of my lifetime, and all my experience. Does he do everything perfectly? Hell no. Is he the perfect guy? No. We've talked about, for the last few days, about Gilgamesh. Before that, we talked about how the ancient religions 4,000 years ago, well, actually, it would be about 6,000 years ago, to 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, how that evolution set up the king of those nations as being perfect. He had to be perfect. He had to be like the Son of God. We see remnants of that today in our own governments. Today, 2020, nearly 2021, we see that our leaders, we want them to be spotless. We do not want them to have character flaws. We don't want them to have done things in their past that looks bad and reflects bad on them now. And frankly, I am one of those who says, you know what? We can't always control what a man does or a woman does. Somebody who's going to be in office, they've all got pasts. Now, do they do things that aren't savory sometimes? Yeah. Have they done things illegally sometimes? Yeah. So how do you gauge somebody who you're going to put into a position of being elected to office? How do you gauge that person when you look at their past life? I've always looked at Donald Trump and said, you know, for the first 60 years of his life, 65 years of his life, he was a billionaire playboy. Those kinds of people that we look to as society and go, hey, we kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, they are, he's a billionaire playboy, but look what he's done. And we've liked him until he ran for politics and people started hating him because he came out and said, this is the way I think things should be done. And if you agree with me, vote for me. I also see him as a man who has, he always had his love for country. He always had his opinions. You can see interviews of him from 35 years ago where he's saying some of the same stuff he's saying today. So I look at that and I say, I support that man because he supports a point of view, a political ideology that overall I agree with. Do I agree with every point of what he has to say? No. Now I look at somebody like a Joe Biden and I say, do I agree with his political ideologies? No, hardly on any point. I agree with his rhetoric. His rhetoric is beautiful. Let's take care of Americans. Oh, damn it, I'm on board for that. But do your policies indicate that that's what you are going to be able to accomplish? Especially when I tend to think it's not Joe Biden who's going to be doing anything if he gets elected. So all of that, I'm not campaigning for anybody. I'm telling you the way I view politics and how I view the current candidates in politics, because it's ever present before our eyes, and we got less than 2 weeks now before that decision is made. And if it's a close decision, it's going to be fought about for months. And even if Donald Trump wins again, it's going to be a fight for another 4 years. All that the left has attempted to do since Donald Trump was elected was try to delegitimize his presidency. And that's why nothing gets. You wonder why nothing gets done? They're all worried about who's in power. So are we going to have a repeat of that? I honestly think Donald Trump is going to win. I think there are a lot of indicators that say that. I don't think Joe Biden is the person for the job. And even if you vote him in, he won't be the person for the job. A vote for Joe Biden is a vote for a Kamala Harris presidency. Think about that for a minute. So all of that, maybe that's campaigning. That is my political opinion. I try to, overall, while you know where I stand, I try to stay out of campaigning. I try to stay out of that stuff. Today, I just want to mention this whole Hunter Biden deal. People are like, well, why are they doing that? That doesn't affect Joe Biden. It does affect Joe Biden. Not because it's his kid. His kid's a grown man and can take care of himself or roll with the punches or face the music he has to face for whatever he's done. The problem that we have is not something that happened 20 years ago in the life of private citizen Joe Biden. This is something that happened while Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States under Barack Hussein Obama. Now, as the vice president, if he indeed did any of the things that are purported, remember, they impeached Donald Trump for making what they believed was an inappropriate phone call to the Russian president. And they impeached him for that. But remember who impeached him. That wasn't a broad national impeachment. That wasn't a bipartisan impeachment. Donald Trump was impeached by the majority in the House of House of Representatives. I don't know why I blanked on the word representatives. I kept thinking Congress. So who impeached Donald Trump? The Democrats in the House of Representatives. There were even some Democrats that went to the other side and voted against it. But because the Democrats held a majority in the House, they were able to impeach Donald Trump. The Republicans resisted it, obviously, and for obvious reasons. It was a political charade. Charade, if you want to call it that. So when you look at that and you say, the President of the United States was by a partisan body impeached, but then by the Senate found to be, which had both Democrats and Republicans voting against the impeachment. He was not convicted of anything. He was not removed from office. They pretty much killed the impeachment. The House Democrats impeached him on a partisan effort, which was the entailment. And by the way, if you didn't know this, I've mentioned it on this show before, that was the 9th time since Donald Trump took office on January 20th of 2017. 9 times, starting the second day after he took the oath of office, they tried to impeach him. These same Democrats in the House of Representatives. And they tried 9 times before they actually did it, and then the Senate squashed it. See ya. Because it was called out for what it was. It was a coup, is what it was. It was not, and it is actually not in the spirit of the constitutional law. And so all of that to say, right now you're going to have fights over legitimacy again. And the Hunter Biden thing is important. And people say, well, it's not true. It's just, pardon the pun, trumped up against Joe Biden to make him look bad. And Joe Biden keeps saying, this is all just a scam of the right. Well, it's really not. And I've got just a news story that's in front of me today that Hunter Biden's business partner confirmed the emails that detailed Joe Biden's push to make millions from China. And one of Joe Biden's ways of contrasting himself with President Trump has been that he declares the election a battle of Park Avenue values versus Scranton, Pennsylvania values. Now we learn that Biden has secretly been playing with the Chinese all along. The statement Wednesday night asserting that the former vice president was a willing and eager participant in a family scheme to make millions of dollars by participating with a shady Chinese communist firm. And that's a singular event. Now, imagine, if Joe Biden wasn't the vice president at the time they were doing this, he'd just be a U.S. businessman doing business with another company in China. But he was selling influence. The dynamite assertion is believable because it aligns with earlier information we know to be true. It came in a statement by Tony Babalutsky, who describes himself as a former partner of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and Joe's brother Jim in the China scheme. Babalutsky unloads his bill of accusations in blunt but precise language and detail. He confirmed that he was one of the recipients of the May 13th, 2017 email published by the Post 8 days ago, the New York Post. And that email from another partner in the group laid out cash and equity positions and mysteriously included a 10% set aside for the big guy, quote unquote. Now, sources have said the big guy was Joe Biden. And in a matter-of-fact manner, Babalutsky states that the email is genuine and that the former vice president and the man leading the 2020 race is indeed the man referred to as the big guy. And this Babalutsky was a business partner in the Biden's efforts. And so that claim alone rips the heart out of nearly, and by the way, this story is about 10 hours old from Babalutsky. And that claim alone rips the heart out of nearly everything Joe Biden has ever said about Hunter's many businesses and Joe's knowledge of them. It's not that Joe is responsible for what his kid did, it's that he knew about them and he allowed his son to sell his influence as vice president. Isn't that why they impeached Donald Trump for his phone call? Because they said he was using presidential influence to take out a candidate who at that time hadn't even announced himself as a candidate. So his repeat, and by the way, everything else that they wanted to impeach Trump on prior to all the 8 other times, suddenly that all went away. All the impeachment was over was the phone call. Why didn't they bring up the other stuff? Because they knew it was all fake. That's the problem we have in politics. So his repeated insistence that the two never spoke, Joe's insistence that he never spoke with his son about global sources of money didn't pass the laugh test. And after all, they traveled together to China on Air Force Two, where Hunter landed a $1.5 billion commitment from a government-controlled Chinese bank. Hey, Dad, can I ride along with you on the vice presidential plane to cut this deal? Then there was Hunter's $83,000 plus a month gig on the board of a Ukrainian energy company, despite his lack of experience in Ukrainian or knowledge of energy. And by the way, there might be some of you out there who are not American citizens who go, well, this doesn't matter to me. It does matter to you. Look at your country and then look at your country's relationship to the United States. Everybody all around the world wants to talk shit about the American people, the American economy, the American presidency. Yet, when it comes to trying to find the facts, and it's none of our business. We don't need to hear about that. It's world business, folks, because you know what? Your country probably subsists a lot on the fact that the United States helps support you. My tax dollars go to help support you around the world. Now, I'm not saying that with any demeaning front to it. I'm just saying there's a matter of fact. If you're not interested in American politics, then make sure your government doesn't use American money. And if they do, look into it and find out, should you be concerned about who the President of the United States is? And so it was no coincidence that the Vice President was the Obama administration's point man in both countries, China and in Ukraine. Wherever Joe went, Hunter went along. Not to do good, but to do very well, as a matter of fact. And there were similarly lucrative deals in Russia, Romania, Kazakhstan, and that we know of. And now because of his role in China and in the China deal, it's been credibly confirmed. It's beyond dispute that Joe didn't just know what was going on. At least in this case, Joe was a player and had his hand out as the Vice President of the United States. And so to that point, perhaps the most devastating paragraph of the 689-word statement, Bobulinski writes that Hunter Biden also referred to his father as my chairman and frequently referenced him, asking him for his sign-off or advice on various potential deals that they were discussing. I've seen Vice President Biden saying he never talked to Hunter about his business, says Bobulinski, who was the CEO of his company being formed. I've seen firsthand that that's not true, because it wasn't just Hunter's business. They said they were putting the Biden family name and its legacy on the line. That's what Bobulinski had to say. That's a remarkable line, one suggestive of the idea that the plan was always to sell Joe Biden's fame and influence as the Vice President of the United States. And in effect, Hunter and sometimes Joe Biden's brother Jim were turning the office of the Vice President of the United States into a pot of gold for themselves. Such malarkey. And so what's not yet clear is whether Joe Biden had secret stakes in any of Hunter's other deals. As for this one, while the date on the May 2017 email could be nearly 4 months after Biden left the White House, it's not known when discussions among the partners and with the Chinese first began. So certainly they started before an email detailing it, referencing it. And so while such details could be legal for Joe Biden when he left government service, the facts take on extra significance during a campaign where China policy is a frequent topic and a big dispute between Trump and Biden. So you can see why this is a big deal. I didn't want to spend half a show on this, but I thought that that was going to be interesting news for you to hear on this statement. You can see the full statement from Tony Bobulinski, and you can, who's a former naval officer, by the way, and you can read all about what he has to say and see if this is something that needs to be talked about. I would ask the Biden family to address the American people. Now, he's going to have maybe a chance tonight in the debates. Do you think that the Democrat-supporting debater or moderator is going to ask him questions? Why is it the press in the United States is ignoring all of this or trying to brush it off as fake when it's anything but fake? It's because they don't want the American people to be influenced by it. But then ask yourself the same question in counterbalancing what the press will talk about Donald Trump. You've seen 4 years of unfounded allegations against Donald Trump, and the press runs with it. Now you see a big thing like this, the same kind of thing they impeached Donald Trump for just having a conversation about, misinterpreted conversation, which he didn't do, and you find that there's a problem. There's a fly in the ointment here. So Biden needs to address this stuff. And you notice since it's all come out, he's been on radio silence. He's put a lid on meeting with the press. And so I'm not in any position to answer those questions for them. I don't have a political axe to grind. I just saw I do have a political axe to grind. I take that back. I want to see the truth brought out. If it's about Trump, let's see the truth. I don't want to hear allegations. I'd like to see somebody like Schiff now comment on Joe Biden. So all they're doing is dismissing it as fake. So you've seen behind the Biden curtain a little bit, and you start to grow concerned with what you see. The Biden family aggressively leveraged the Biden family name to make millions of dollars from foreign entities, even though some of them were from communist-controlled China. And did this start during Joe Biden's vice presidency? Well, God bless America. There we go. Let's leave that at that, and I have used pretty much the entirety of the first half of this show, but I think it's important that we think about these things. Don't think about it so much as, well, yeah, I guess I am coming right out and saying, if you're voting for Joe Biden, you're probably voting for a criminal. Probably voting for somebody who is engaged in corruption, who has sold his office, who has done more than Donald Trump ever did. So I think it's worth looking at. Does that mean you still vote for Biden? I would say your vote shouldn't go to Biden. If you don't want to vote for Trump, then vote for somebody else. There's 26 other candidates running, whether you know it or not. None of them are going to win. You know why? Because nobody knows about them. We kind of tacitly know who the Green Party is, or the Independence Party, or the whatever. All we know of is the two main parties. That's basically how the country divides. But I would say this: I wouldn't vote for Biden. I'm smart enough to know not to vote for Biden. And if I didn't like Trump, I would write in my vote, or I would vote for somebody else. An abstinence vote speaks volumes as well. A vote for a third party, 4th, 5th, 6th, 20th party, is speaking your conscience as well. So I would recommend that you take that step. But to vote for Biden is you're voting for corruption in a family, and furthermore, you're voting for the name of the man who is not going to be running the presidency of the United States. You're voting for Kamala Harris for president. She said it herself in a slip. Nah, it's a slip of the tongue. Remember a few weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, she was making a statement and she said, well, here in the Harris, the Harris administration, with Joe Biden, she said. Go find that. It's intriguing. But you see a lot of the stuff the press doesn't report on. You know why? Because the press is backing a candidate. There's so much more to say on that, but I'm going to leave it at that. That's as political as I've ever gotten on this show, and we're going to end it with this first segment. I'm going to move on into talking about the topic of the night, which I got to tell you, it was not this topic at all. I was going to talk about the historical Jesus and how Jesus maybe saw himself, and the whole search for the historical Jesus, you could almost better call it the search for the wrong Jesus. So come on back.
for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, folks, thanks for sitting on through that break. Hope we've all recovered from the political spasm I had for the first segment of this show. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. And at the same time, come on over, tune in the live YouTube video simulcast with the live YouTube chat room going on right now. Come on over to youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And now we've got about 27 and a half minutes to get into this topic in this second half. The second half of this show, 28.5 minutes with bump lead-in music and bump takeout music. So I'll try to use up as much of this good time as we can. And by the way, go visit my website, ScottAllenRoberts.com. Scott, S-C-O-T-T, Allen, A-L-A-N, A-L-A-N. ScottAllenRoberts.com. See all the stuff I do and avail yourself of some of what I offer over there. You can see all my links to everything I do, everywhere, my whole presence on the internet you can find on that site. So let's move on. I wanted to talk about the historical Jesus. We've segued now out of the whole Assyrian kingship, the whole Assyrian history of religion going back to 4000 BCE, 6,000 years ago. We've talked about how the evolution of religion, how it's become a personal religion up to the first millennium BCE and into the time of Christ and thereafter. We've talked about in the past on the show the Gnostic Jesus, the mystery religions, the fight for the first 200 years AD after the death of Jesus, trying to establish which course they were going to follow on the story of Jesus. The Gnostic mystic source, the mythical source, or were they going to take the literal Orthodox course? And the Orthodox, of course, won, and that's where we got the Roman Catholic Church, came out of that. And so now down through the centuries, there's always been questions about Jesus, about the historical Jesus, and really the quest for the historical Jesus came to a real head about, what would it be, 40, 45 years ago, the middle of the 1970s, and thereafter they had the Jesus, what do they call it, the Jesus Project, the Historical Jesus Project, the search for the historical Jesus, all this, and tons of books written on this. And I wanted to look at this for a little bit. This search for Jesus, the search for the historical Jesus. We've talked about this. We've hit on this before. But there's a couple of different takes I want to look at this. I saw something where somebody was asking the question, how did Jesus see himself, and how do we interpret that? It all depends on hermeneutics. Do you know what hermeneutics are? If I gave you that word, hermeneutics, Hermeneutics, hermeneutics. This is the theory and the methodology of interpretation of scriptural passages, especially biblical texts, wisdom literature, philosophical texts, and it's more than the interpretive principles or methods used when immediate comprehension fails and includes the art of understanding and communication of such. So hermeneutics, this is a big thing that we were taught in Bible college and seminary. There's a class on hermeneutics, We had classes on textual criticism, looking at things. So, how do you think maybe Jesus saw himself? How do you think we can search for the wrong Jesus? And these are almost two different points that I've merged, but I'm still deciding in my head as I'm talking to you now which tack I want to take first. And I think we could say there's the search for the wrong Jesus that's out there, but there's also the search for how Jesus saw himself. And maybe we'll go with the wrong Jesus first, because as I already mentioned, the first half of the 1990s really embroiled the whole Jesus seminar. That's the historical search for Jesus. That's what the organization was called, the Jesus Seminar. And it capped a decade of self-promotion with the publication of the 5 Gospels, the search for the authentic words of Jesus. Here's some of the books that came out. Highly publicized forays into the search for Jesus were undertaken by amateurs like Bishop John Spong, A.N. Wilson, Stephen Mitchell. And their books, I could go through and name all their books respectfully, but one was Born of a Woman by John Spong. A Bishop Rethinks the Birth of Jesus. Then there was A.N. Wilson's book, Jesus, just simply titled that. Then there was Stephen Mitchell's book, The Gospel According to Jesus. This was HarperCollins. And these were by professional biblical scholars such as Marcus Borg came up with one. And his was A New Vision, Spirit, Culture, and the Life of Discipleship. And he also wrote Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. And Jesus in the Heart of the Contemporary Faith. And also he wrote Jesus in Contemporary Scholarship. So he wrote a lot about Jesus. All these books were coming out. Barbara Thering, she wrote Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls, subtitled Unlocking the Secrets of His Life Story. That was by Barbara Thering. Burton Mack, I've quoted him before. It's not explicitly part of the quest, but his 2 major works were really closely aligned to the methods and the presuppositions that are surveyed in the whole study of Christ, and that is The Myth of Innocence, Mark, and the Christian Origins. And he also wrote The Last Gospel, the Book of Q, and Christian Origins. And so, and then Dominic Crossan, of course, he wrote, I say of course because I've just read a ton of stuff of his. He wrote The Historical Jesus, The Life of a Mediterranean Jewish Peasant. And he also wrote Jesus, a Revolutionary Biography. He wrote Who Killed Jesus? Exposing the Roots of Anti-Semitism in the Gospel Story and the Death of Jesus. So these are some of the books, these are some of the works that were the kind of the capstones in the whole quest for the historical Jesus along the way. And in addition to the press coverage of the Jesus Seminar, and by the way, yeah, this was all over the press at the time it was happening, the Jesus Seminar, the news media was following it. They show the Jesus Seminar's regional camp meetings. There are articles in major newspapers reviewing and assessing this new quest. It was kind of a TED Talk version meant for the search for the historical Jesus. And they had articles in major newspapers reviewing and assessing the new quest. The effort's been sufficiently noisy enough to attract attention in such unlikely quarters as The Atlantic Monthly, The Humanist, GQ Magazine, and Lingua Franca. And far removed from the promotional mills, John Meyer of Catholic University in Washington, D.C., has continued to toil away at the most monumental historical project of all, called A Marginal Jew, Rethinking the Historical Jesus. And Meyer's work doesn't, in the main, fall under the summarizing of the historical Jesus per se, but for an appreciation and critique of his volumes, you have to look at his book, and you have to test the gospel story. And so it's safe to say, I think, that all of this commotion over the historical Jesus has created a general impression that the quest for the historical Jesus is an important one, or somewhere along the way we have ranked this as a very important thing. And although not because, as the Jesus Seminar publicly would have it, scholars will lose their jobs under pressure of reactionary Christians, and certainly not because these questers have come to such firm and unassailable conclusions that the Guild of the New Testament scholars should close up shop because nothing remains to be done. It's a bunch of hooey. The opposite is the case. Their portraits of Jesus, as they've historically researched him, are widely varied. Nobody has come to a common conclusion. In the crisp summary of T.W. Manson, he said, "By their lives of Jesus you shall know them." And that's true. It's called, T.W. Manson wrote the book, The Failure of Liberalism to Interpret the Bible as the Word of God. And this was in the Interpretation of the Bible that was published in London. 1944, he published that. And so, Jesus appears in all the pages of these guys as Qumran's wicked priest, that was Barbara Thiering, as a guru of oceanic peace, that was Stephen Mitchell, as a charismatic, which was Marcus Borg, and as a peasant cynic by John Dominic Crossan. And so the real significance of these highly public exhibits is that they've shown the wider world just how shaky some of the premises actually are, and how shoddy some of the procedures are, and a great deal of the biblical scholarship, both past and present. So when I speak of shoddy practices, I have in mind more than media manipulation of the Jesus Seminar, or the seminar's periodic pronouncements about who Jesus really was, before even a portion of the traditional dealing with him have been dealt with. Until now, the Jesus Seminar was considered only Jesus' sayings, not his acts. Or its failure in the first 5 Gospels, that book that was written, even to apply its own criteria of authenticity consistently. And so I have to refer instead to the lack of true critical scholarship, running in varying degrees, to be sure, through all of these books and publications. There's a lack of, I almost look at it as Zechariah Sitchin type of scholarship, where they might be onto something, but there's misinterpretation. The hermeneutics are poor. The scholarship is not of a high level. It's missing points, let's put it that way. So with so many images of Jesus that are being produced, one would have to just look at the movies, by the way, pictures of Jesus that you see. One would expect some embarrassment over a supposedly scientific method that yields such widely divergent results. When you apply the scientific method to something, isn't that you put it under scrutiny in the lab, in the classroom, in the research room? You put it under scrutiny and repeat it over and over and over and over and over again to make sure that your idea can become a hypothesis, which can have a theory built around it. So the problem is, with all this supposedly scientific methodology that's put to place in the search for the historical Jesus, there's widely divergent results. So how do you know who's true? Is that really a scientific method if they all come up with a different angle? That tells me there's a lot of opinion, there's a lot of personal regard, a lot of personal religion that's put into the search for the historical Jesus. Hell, I do it. I have certain things that I adhere to, and I look for that. But I try to present with an air of honesty and truth about it. So, some debate over what constitutes a legitimately derived image, or a demonstration of why one image should be preferred over the other. In fact, practically nothing along these lines occurs. There's much assertion, but little argument. Marcus Borg cites a poll he took among like-minded colleagues as his most substantial reason for seeking a non-eschatological Jesus. And this poll was, Borg, it was called New Vision, Jesus in Contemporary Scholarship. And working through this literature, I haven't been able to make up my mind whether it's a colloquial and causal discourse, and that's the function of sloppiness or of cynicism. But I find what appears to be this deliberate sliding back and forth between two understandings of history. On the one hand, an author claims to be doing critical scholarship without presupposition or without bias, and with the neutral assessments of sources, with the goal of simply discovering who Jesus really was, quote unquote. On the other hand, they assume that this historical Jesus should somehow be normative, and that in the light of their scholarly deductions, Christianity needs to check its creed as well as its canon. And so once more, Jesus' seminar was an egregious example, claiming out of one side of its mouth that is practicing the most sober, critical research. Yet from the other side of its mouth, both sides represented mostly by Robert Funk, who was the chief spokesperson, claiming at the very outset of the project that it intends to use the assured results of scholarship to save Christianity from its evangelical captors. And you have to see what Funk had to say in some of his opening remarks in the forum, and you're going back almost 40 years to find these quotes of his. And the works by these authors are examined more fully in The Real Jesus, The Misguided Quest of the Historical Jesus and the Truth of the Traditional Gospels. And that was Harper, San Francisco. That was published in 1995. Some of this stuff is getting really old. This, by the way, 1995, thereabouts, this was the same period of time where I was producing a lot of works for teens and young adults on Jesus, the life of Jesus. That's when I did the trading cards on the life of Jesus. As a matter of fact, if you go to my website, scottallenroberts.com, click on the art and design link, and in there in the top somewhere in text, you're going to see the Jesus cards or something like that. Go ahead and take a look at that, and you'll see some of the samples of what we put out. I wanted to write about Jesus, and when you've got a card that's that big, a trading card, and you've got that much room for information, I tried to throw information that was pithy and to the point. As a matter of fact, you know what? I'll tell you some of the things that I actually said about Jesus and show you how I handled this information. Now, I wanted the information to be something that was usable by kids. Biblical trading cards, it's under. Now, here's the biblical trading cards. I think I have some of these where I actually show, maybe I don't. I thought I showed the back sides of these cards, and perhaps I don't. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. So I've got some of these cards. I show the front and the back sides of the card to give you an idea. And I only did this so you could have an idea of what you were looking at, what you were reading. What does the story actually say? I've got this card here. Yeshua Bar Yashaf is the title of the card. And I've got this close-up of a perceived comic book style Jewish-looking Jesus, Semitic-looking Jesus. And the text that I wrote says this: "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" quote unquote. So said the unbelieving Nathanael, reflecting the disdain that savvy Judeans held for the inhabitants of the backwater Galilee region. After Joseph and Mary left Egypt with the infant Jesus, they settled in a small hillside town of Nazareth, where Joseph reestablished himself in his trade as a carpenter or a stonecutter. Nazareth sat atop a hillside that literally overlooked the world as it passed by along the King's Highway in the valley below Nazareth. Merchant caravans, Roman troops, political convoys from as far away as Europe, Mesopotamia, and the Far East traveled and sometimes through the little town. It was here that Jesus grew up as one of the apprentice sons to a skilled tradesman, building his reputation with the people of his hometown. As the adopted son of Joseph, he was entitled to the same distinction as an heir, and as such bore the legal name of Yeshua bar Yashov, Jesus, the son of Joseph. And then I ask a question on each one of these cards. Where is this in the Bible? And I put verses in there, Matthew 1 and 2 and 13. And did Jesus' siblings believe he was the Messiah? See John 7, 3 through 5, and Mark 3, 20 through 21. So this is how the cards that we put together looked. And by we, it was me. I was doing this for Northwestern Publications. And so when you start looking at these things and looking at the different interpretations of who Jesus was supposed to be, there are those who have tried to unmoor Jesus from the roots of Christianity's evangelical captors. And so apart from the usual noteworthy exception of John Meyer, the author, one cannot find in any of these productions, these books, these articles, this plethora of information written about the historical Jesus, a critical reflection on the meaning of history itself. No consideration of its goals, its methods, or above all, its limitations. And you can look at that in his book. By the way, there's a book you can look at. This is Meyer's book, Marginal Jew. So such conceptual carelessness enables these books to offer the real Jesus, quote unquote, without ever engaging the truly difficult questions of the methods of historical knowing. Nowhere do these practitioners pause to consider that history is not to be equated with reality, or that in fact history, while important, is also a limited mode of human cognition, with a great deal of what all humans consider both real and important slipping through its rough sieve. And so, to a remarkable extent, one finds in these tracts the same positivistic understanding of history that characterizes the fundamentalism they might oppose. And so the authors of all these books fail to inform their readers that to state that the resurrection is not historical, that is, it may not be demonstrable from a historical source, it's not the same thing as to state that it's not real. Now, I'm not altogether certain of that distinction has occurred to the authors even themselves who write all of this stuff. Let me repeat that. The authors fail to inform their readers that to state that the resurrection is not historical, that is, that it may not be demonstrable from historical sources, is not the same thing as to state that it didn't happen and that it's not real. We all know, and we talk about on this show all the time, there are things that are historical, political, things that are tangible that we deal with. But we all know, don't we all know, there is an intangible side to the universe. How many of you listening to this show pray? Can there be a scientific, historical example of prayer actually reaching the throne of God? No, there isn't. There's nothing in history that proves that. Does that mean it doesn't exist? No. It means it's not historically provable or archaeologically provable or even scientifically provable. There are things that fall outside the realm of the veils that we're able to pierce. And so, beyond such shoddy practice, there's the matter of shaky premises. Here we find that these Jesus books bring to the surface some really dubious assumptions that have for too long been allowed to pass uncriticized within the Scholars Guild. Perhaps a reason some scholars have been loath to criticize these productions, rather than simply hoping they might go away, is that they employ methods and moves widely used in the field, but they take them one step further into this obvious absurdity. Now it's time for the Guild not only to reject the reductio, to throw out my use of Latin, the reductio, the reduction of, but to also recognize the absurdum. The reductio begets the absurdum, to which, and you can figure out what those words mean, to which it's allowed free play for too long. There's absurd play here in search for the historical Jesus. So, the popular publications claim to represent serious scholarship. Serious scholarship can rightly object to being tarred by the bush of all self-promotion, meretriciousness, sloppiness, cynicism. And the tone of the introduction to the book The Five Gospels, for example, combines messianism and hucksterism in equal measure. Calling the belief that there was a Messiah is the same as being a huckster. And with the delusions of grandeur emitting a definitely paranoid aura about Jesus and any messianic claims. But is the scholarly guild prepared to face up to the fact that these Jesus books also reveal ways of doing business that are at best shaky and at worst plain silly? We don't hear a lot about that. We hear a lot of criticisms of the historical Jesus. I run across people, even in social media, where something's mentioned, we know Jesus was just a myth. Or, we know the whole Bible is mythological. Well, it's like, okay, please, you, state for me your source. What's your evidence to support that claim? Nobody's got it. So 3 such practices surface in virtually all of these books, leaving one to wonder whether anything like recognizable historical research is actually going on. The first is the way the hermeneutics of suspicion is applied to virtually everything in the New Testament and to virtually nothing outside. Remember what I said the definition of hermeneutics was? It's the practice, the methodology of interpretation, especially of scriptural texts, sacred literature, wisdom literature, so on. So it's the hermeneutics of suspicion, meaning their hermeneutics, their whole, what's the word I'm looking at? Their whole category, their whole theme of their hermeneutical interpretation is one of suspicion, that any of it's actually true. And that's applied to virtually everything in the New Testament, and to virtually nothing outside of the New Testament. So the canonical Gospels, one is led to think, are the least likely sources of knowledge about Jesus. And if they're to be used, they have to be purified of later accretions or distortions brought from a faith perspective. I have believed that. I have touted that. If they're to be used, they have to be purified. They have to be washed clean of all the additional junk that's been added to it. They must be read in the light of apocryphal writings, or some earlier source excavated from within them, or some social scientific model. Indeed, the only sources that can't be referred to are the other writings of the New Testament. You can't use that to support it. Now, I have looked to the Gnostic Gospels. I've looked to the Gnostic mysticism. We've talked about that. So thus, despite the fact that the Pauline letters, the Apostle Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, are the earliest datable sources for anything about Christianity. He wrote those things between 50 and 64 BCE. And despite the fact that Paul's letters attest to a number of separate points in the Jesus story, as found in the canonical Gospels, and despite the even more striking point that Paul's interpretation of the Jesus story as one of the radical obedience to God and self-donation to humans is precisely the same as that found in all 4 canonical Gospels. And only in them, among all Jesus traditions, the evidence from Paul is not considered historically relevant. Whether you believe he was a decent man or not, or an apostle or not, he's providing information. So what's going on with all this? We'll have to look at that tomorrow because we're out of time. Thank you for being here. Tomorrow I promise less politics, more about the historical Jesus.